Hi there, history fans, and welcome back to our journey through World War I, presented by Epic History TV. So today we have the year 1917, so we're like, 3.5 years into the conflict, and the year 1917 is a pretty big and important year for not only World War I, but everything that happened after the First World War. But I think that they're going to cover everything or almost everything. I also wanted to inform you guys and girls, I'm going to post a poll tomorrow or in 2 days on the community tab as I did the last time. So we're first going to choose, or you're going first going to choose which channel I'm going to cover, and then which series or which videos I'm going to be covering in the future after this series ends, because we have this video and then one on the year 1918, and then we're done with this series, with this great series so far. Okay, let's jump in.
In 1916, World War I became a war of attrition. Both sides began to focus less on winning victory on the battlefield than grinding down the enemy and inflicting such enormous losses they would be forced to surrender. In 1917, the strategy will push Europe's major powers to the brink of collapse. Germany knows it will lose a long war of attrition against the Allies, who have greater resources. So its leaders gamble. They resume unrestricted submarine warfare, believing their U-boats can cut off Britain's food imports by sea and starve the country into surrender within 6 months.
6 months. Very optimistic.
But the new shoot-on-sight tactics mean neutral American ships will inevitably be caught in the crossfire, risking America joining the war on the Allied side. Just 2 days into the campaign, the SS Housatonic, an American steamer carrying wheat from Galveston, Texas to England, is sunk by a U-boat. The British then pass to the US government a telegram they've intercepted from German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann to the German ambassador in Mexico. Germany is encouraging Mexico to attack
that was
America
a big deal. That was a big
America
deal.
and Germany end up at war. The so-called Zimmermann telegram puts yet more pressure on US President Wilson to declare war on Germany.
Okay, so let's talk about the situation that we're in right now. So we have a pretty big stalemate on the Western Front. We have a so-so stalemate on the Eastern Front, although Germans and Austro-Hungarians are pushing. Serbia has fallen, so the Serbs retreated to Greece, where they regrouped with the Allies, so the British and the French, and then formed a new front in Greece, where they would try to invade into Serbia again, but Bulgaria is also on that front supporting the Austro-Hungarians. Okay, with the naval blockade that Great Britain did on the Germans are practically starving Great Britain and France, and in some capacity Russia. They have naval connections with their colonies, with other parts, and potential allies like the US. They had more connections outside of Europe, so they could import different stuff. The Zimmermann telegram was huge, because that was one of the turning points where the US public started to support Woodrow Wilson in his push or decisions to join the war in Europe. Because the US general population didn't want to meddle in European affairs. Prior to the First World War, they had an isolationist policy, pretty much isolationist policy, so don't meddle with other powers, especially in Europe. But Woodrow Wilson starts to change that, and he wants to meddle in European affairs because he wants to project US power now in Europe.
A war on Germany.
That's why 1917 is a big year.
In
the Russian
Russia,
Revolution.
enormous casualties and bread shortages lead to riots and revolution. The Tsar abdicates. A provisional government takes charge, pledging to continue the war.
The
But
Duma.
at the front, Russian troops begin to desert en masse. After a string of German provocations, the US finally declares war on Germany. It brings immense resources to the Allied cause, but they will take many months to mobilize. And the German gamble of unrestricted submarine warfare may still pay off. April is the U-boats' most successful month of the war. They sink 886,000 tons of Allied shipping,
Wow.
an average of 17 ships a day, all packed with urgently needed food and supplies.
Wow. Talking about German efficiency.
Britain will face starvation if the U-boats are not defeated soon. On the Western Front, the British launched the Battle of Arras, a diversion to support a major upcoming French offensive. After heavy fighting, Canadian troops seized the high ground of Vimy Ridge. It's a limited Allied victory, but costs 150,000 Allied casualties to 130,000 German. Above the trenches, the First Air War has reached new levels of sophistication and deadliness. Reconnaissance aircraft are crucial for spotting enemy positions and directing artillery fire onto them. Scout aircraft or fighters try to shoot them down before they can execute their mission.
Are they going to mention the Red Baron?
But that spring, the superiority of German aircraft leads to heavy Allied losses in what becomes known as Bloody April.
So as the war progresses, the Allied forces have much more to throw at the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians. So what he didn't mention, but I think it's very important, is the Italian front, where the Italians don't have any chance to break the Austro-Hungarian lines defended by the Austrians, Slovenians, and Croats. But the Allies lost two big players in their team. So Russia and Serbia, which was pretty effective holding against Austria-Hungary on their own, but they're now gaining an industrial superpower on their side, and that's the US. Now, the US, prior to the First World War, they didn't have a big standing army, but as the First World War started, and when they joined the First World War in 1917, they started to expand, mobilize, modernize their army. So the US didn't only start to project their economic power on Europe and the rest of the world, but they also started to project their expand and project their military power on Europe. But so that was a big win despite the Allies losing Russia, although Russia by now isn't doing that great on the Eastern Front. Despite losing Russia and Serbia on their side, they gained a big ally now in the fight, an open ally.
3 days after the fall of Vimy Ridge, French General Robert Nivelle launches his main offensive. Expectations are high, but after initial success, the advance bogs down and casualties quickly mount on both sides.
The numbers.
The apparently senseless losses cause morale in the French army to collapse. Whole units mutiny, refusing to attack. General Nivelle is sacked as French commander-in-chief and replaced by General Pétain, hero of Verdun,
Here he comes.
No more suicidal attacks. That summer, at Messines Ridge, the British tunnel under the German lines and detonate 19 enormous mines under the enemy position. It's the largest man-made explosion in history to date, and
Wow.
paves the way to a brilliant but highly
Wow, just look at the crater. Here is a
British
guy.
victory.
He looks like an ant. What?
In Greece, King Constantine, who has favoured neutrality, is forced to abdicate, and Greece joins the Allies. Russia's provisional government orders a new attack, but the July offensive is a disaster. The morale and discipline of the Russian army has collapsed. It can no longer be relied on to fight, and the Central Powers' counterattack is almost unopposed. At sea, the Allies begin to group their merchant ships into convoys, which sail under naval escort. The new system leads to a steady fall in losses. The tide is turning in the U-boat war. As discontent with the war grows in Germany, the German parliament, the Reichstag, passes a peace resolution, calling for a peace of understanding and reconciliation. It's ignored by the German High Command, which now effectively rules the country as a military dictatorship. In Belgium, the British launched their major offensive.
And not only that, the Germans gambled a lot when they sent Lenin to Russia to start a revolution and to kick Russia out of the war. Why? Because the communist and socialist ideas were widespread throughout Europe, and especially in Germany. Austria-Hungary has the problem with Pan-Slavism and Yugoslavism, where the Slavs inside of the monarchy start to desert, retreat. You know, like they don't see the point in fighting for the Habsburgs, and they start to desert, and the morale plummets even more and more. But in Germany, at the home front, they're starting to lose, and the government is starting to get more and more pressure from political pressure from the socialist and communist parties, especially in Bavaria.
Offensive of 1917, the Third Battle of Ypres. It will be remembered as Passchendaele. Heavy shelling, rain and broken irrigation channels turned the battlefield into a sea of mud. In
And
these
just imagine
impossible
living there
conditions, all hopes of a
for
breakthrough
months.
soon fade. The attack is called off after 3 months, by which point the British have suffered 240,000 casualties, the Germans 200,000. On the Italian front, at the 11th Battle of the Isonzo, Italian and Austro-Hungarian forces batter each other into exhaustion. There are 150,000 Italian casualties, 100,000 Austro-Hungarian.
The Italian generals just did a poor job on the Italian front. I mean, on the other side, the Austro-Hungarian generals did a great, phenomenal job in defending that territory, but it was a big fault in the Italian generals, where they just threw men at the strong defensive positions of the Austrians or Austro-Hungarians.
That year, 1917, the list of Allied nations grows. Brazil, Liberia, China, and Siam all declare war on Germany.
They're
as
just
a result
jumping
of German
on the
U-boat
bandwagon.
attacks, or to curry favour with the Allies.
Yeah, of course.
China will contribute many thousands of labourers working for the Allies in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia.
Is it now Lawrence of Arabia time?
That year in the Middle East, British forces avenge their 1916 humiliation at Kut by defeating the Ottoman Turks and marching on to occupy Baghdad. British forces in Egypt advance across the Sinai Desert. but are thrown back by Ottoman forces at the First and Second Battles of Gaza. In July, Arab rebels capture the strategic Ottoman port of Aqaba. They are accompanied by a British military advisor, Captain T.E. Lawrence,
Yep.
better known as Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia. Yep.
That autumn, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issues the Balfour Declaration.
And just a quick note on the Ottoman Empire. They're primarily battling the Russians here at this choke point here. The Brits are attacking the Ottoman Empire from the rear because they think that they can support the Russians on the east.
Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issues the Balfour Declaration, expressing support for the creation of a national home for the Jews in Palestine. The aim is to rally Jewish support for the Allies, but the declaration contradicts existing pledges to Arab leaders. In October, the British finally win at Gaza, clearing the way for an advance into Palestine. 6 weeks later, General Allenby leads British troops into Jerusalem, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule.
Oh.
With Russian forces in disarray, Germany is able to move troops from the east to the Italian front. At the Battle of Caporetto, they helped to smash through the Italian army, advancing 70 miles and taking 250,000 prisoners. British and French divisions, desperately needed on the Western Front, have to be redeployed to shore up the line.
Yeah, when you enter the Great Plain of Veneto in this region, and then you have the River Po here, I mean, you need to defend this one because it's just a big valley, and then eventually, if the Central Powers take the basin of the Po River and the Veneto region, they could eventually outflank somehow. I don't know how exactly, but potentially, maybe. Let me know if you think otherwise, but potentially they could outflank the Brits and the French by attacking here through the south.
In Russia, a second revolution brings Lenin's Bolshevik party to power. He is determined to end Russia's involvement in the war.
Not at the beginning, not at the beginning.
Clemenceau becomes prime minister. Nicknamed the Tiger, he promises total war and total victory. But for the Allies in late 1917, final victory looks uncertain. Russia has stopped fighting. French armies are recovering from mutiny. The Italian front has almost collapsed. And American reinforcements still seem a long way off. For the time being, the British are the only effective Allied force in the field. So the British attack at Cambrai with the first major tank assault in history.
Didn't know that.
On the first day, nearly 400 tanks spearhead an advance of several miles through German defences. But then the tanks break down or are knocked out. The Germans rush in reinforcements, and the gains are lost. Finland declares independence from Russia. Romania, isolated by the Russian collapse, signs an armistice with the Central Powers. 6 days later, Russia also signs an armistice. The Allied Eastern Front is no more. 1917 has seen one major Allied power, Russia, knocked out of the war. But the arrival of a fresh new ally, America. Germany knows only military victory can now save it from being overwhelmed by Allied resources. and begins planning one last massive onslaught for the spring of 1918. Epic History TV relies on the support of fellow history lovers. So if you like what we do, please consider pledging anything from $1 per video at the channel's Patreon page.
Good job, Epic History TV. I have a different point of view regarding the situation in 1917. Yes, as I said, it's a big deal that the Russians got kicked out of the war for, you know, like the Central Powers, but also the Allies, so they lost a big player. But Russia in the First World War wasn't doing that great. They were doing okay against the Austro-Hungarians, but they did terrible against the Germans. So knocking out Russia out of the war is a big deal, but I think it's an even bigger deal that US joined the war. So they have fresh troops, fresh military, a big population, a big economy that's now openly supporting the Allies. So yeah, the Brits were active, but I also wouldn't write off the French. The French held their ground and they did a lot to suppress the German advance into France. Because they were highly motivated, you know, like I don't know how much, like 100 kilometers or something like that. In the back is Paris. Here's the front, so the Germans are already in French land. So just hold them there. So that the morale, I think, was actually pretty high as far as I have read. Great video again. So we have one video to go, and that's the last year of the war, 1918. Hope that you enjoyed it. Hope that you're going to watch the last video and that you're going to also vote in the polls. Voting is important. Okay, until the next time. Ciao.